Io ho rubato la sua identità. Io ho rubato la sua identità. Io ho rubato la sua
Martha is Dead is a story-driven, first-person psychological horror game that follows Giulia as she deals with the guilt of her murdered twin sister. Atmosphere. The atmosphere changes wildly from one part of the game to another. There are moments of serenity as Giulia wanders the grounds of the peaceful Italian villa that she resides in, and moments of extreme discomfort as her psychological condition seems to lead her to the logical conclusion that she must commit unnatural acts, and she partakes in things that are nearly unbearable to watch. There's also the backdrop of the war, with her on the side of the Axis as her father is a German general, and the looming threat of war hangs over the entire game, being brought up in dialogue and radio broadcasts in the background until it's there in front of her. There's Nazi flags that hang over Martha's coffin at the funeral, and it's just unsettling to see. But really, the atmosphere is mostly consumed by the uncomfortable feeling of guilt that the game manages to inflict on the player, as Giulia swaps places with Martha at the start of the game, and is perceived as her deceased twin sister for quite a long time by her friends and family. It manages to keep the feeling of apprehension and tension going for a lot of the game, as the fear of discovery builds, that her lie will come crumbling down around her.
Non so da dove cominciare. Ci sono così tante cose. Dovrei iniziare dalla mia infanzia, ma di quel periodo ricordo così.
There's a lot of haunting dream sequences that only intensify the feeling of guilt, and Giulia herself seems to have an extremely difficult time recalling events, and it leads to a lot of confusion as to what's real and what isn't into the late game, making her difficult to relate to. Though there is a lot of time where you're left alone in the villa, and besides a small sense of isolation, the atmosphere doesn't really creep in at all as you walk its sun-soaked environments. And the more side quests that you engage with, the less of the atmosphere of the main story creeps in. Martha is Dead layers uncomfortable themes and wartime tension over a story of soul and identity, and at the heart of it all is a player character who keeps on making things worse. And whilst her state of mind ends up increasingly apprehension and dread just to see what she's going to do next, the game spends too much time leaving the player alone with no atmosphere at all, from exploring her house and gardens to spending long periods of time developing photos. When the atmosphere is there, it's great, a near constant feeling of dread, but it's not always there. That's no Harry Masons.
Giulia.
Scares. The game doesn't really have any traditional scares. There's no enemies or jump scares or even scripted events, but the game's fear runs a bit deeper, with the feeling that someone is going to walk in on Giulia as she does these messed up things. The fear of discovery intensifies as Giulia keeps on sinking deeper. Besides this, there's the disturbing dream she has, and that's seemingly about it. Taking pictures is a big part of the game, with many sections having photo opportunities, but the mechanic isn't really utilised for the benefit of the horror. Though it's not like the game would have benefited with scripted events or enemies, and certainly not jump scares. Its psychological horror creates an intense feeling that you're doing something wrong or partaking in something you shouldn't as you guide Giulia through the game, and due to the intensity of the events, it really lingers a long time after you finish playing. That's one Harry Mason. Sound design. The music is only really present in cutscenes and dream sequences, with disturbing, frantic plucking of stringed instruments and scraping noises, like the sound of an unpleasant, discordant inversion of insanity. In other cutscenes, there's beautiful but also somewhat sad opera being sung that emphasizes in moments of importance to Giulia's life. There's radio songs playing in the background, and just like in real life, the music that plays is either upbeat and random, and it keeps trying to distract from what's really going on. The rest of the game is peaceful, but sometimes eerily quiet, like you're being left alone with your thoughts, with bird songs and environmental noises filling the air, clocks ticking, water running, just the general sounds of home. The sound effects that play are all perfectly realistic, and the environments feel stunningly real thanks to the dedication to recreating things so accurately. Sometimes the disturbing music covers up things like scissors cutting flesh, which is also so slick and sickeningly realistic that I'm almost thankful that it does. The voice acting is available in both Italian, which is the native language, or English. I played it in Italian, and as far as I can tell, it's pretty excellent. The characters sound emotive even if you can't tell what they're saying. The reverb is realistic, and directional audio is as good as can be expected. The sound design is immaculate, and the game relies on it a lot, and it never lets it down. That's 2 Harry Masons.
Mi sono sempre piaciuti I suoi quadri. Da bambina li guardavo per ore.
Gore. The game's gore is disturbingly realistic and unpleasant in the way that it's presented, with flesh being sliced through and internals removed. It would spoil too much of the game to explain everything, but they're some of the most deeply unpleasant scenes I've ever seen. They're so jarring that they're difficult to forget, and their impact on Giulia is hard to understate. That's 3 Harry Masons. Story. The game opens with Giulia being told a story about a woman in the lake who claims the lives of young women. Holding on to the story in later life, she's taking pictures down by the lake when she finds her twin sister Martha floating lifelessly in the water. She pulls her ashore, and since they switched clothes that day, her parents find her, think that she's her sister, and she goes along with it. The story is about guilt and deception, but also jealousy and cruelty. There's supernatural elements that keep on blending with reality, and it's unclear if any of these things are really happening, because of how Giulia keeps on saying she's seeing things and doesn't remember events, even though sometimes you were there. Her logic and reasoning breaks down so badly by the end of the game that the story becomes difficult to understand, but the things that are told, regardless of whether they're true or not, are either deeply sad or painfully disturbing, with her mother's apparent cruelty being overwhelming in the unhinged puppet plays that Giulia puts on. The game peppers in a lot of folklore and tells the story in various different ways. The diary entries Giulia writes herself are the most interesting, and whilst none of them are bad or boring, the ones about her thoughts and the updates on the war are the ones that stand out the most. But sadly, where the game really falls down for me is the ending, where the player is presented with a choice of what they want the ending to be, changing previous events and making things simply not valid. And whilst this may be a parallel to Giulia's mind as she chooses the most favourable story to reflect her past, it doesn't feel very good to just disregard so many things that happened, and left me feeling a bit disappointed. Making the final score 3 out of 5 Harry Masons. Martha is Dead contains a ton of unsettling imagery in the game, and I feel it'll last much longer in people's minds than the story that it's trying to tell. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Always go check out Bumps in the Middle of the Night. Peace.